Hey, what's up guys? This is Rail Chief here and welcome back to my channel. My name is Mike and this is episode 5 of the Lionel 10 Days of Christmas Spectacular. And in today's video, I wanted to share with you guys how many of the Pennsylvania locomotives I have in my collection. Now in case you guys remember last year, I did a similar video on this type of topic. The only difference is that I counted how many trains I collected during the pandemic when the pandemic started. But in this video, I want to show you guys how many of the Pennsylvania locomotives I have in my collection. So starting off with our first engine here, we have the Lionel Pennsylvania 671 turbine. First made in 1946, this was actually the first locomotive to feature a smoke unit. However, the smoke unit that Lionel developed during 1946 was actually a giant light bulb with a dimple inside. Now, when you drop the smoke pellet inside the smokestack, the dimple would hold the smoke pellet, and while the train was moving, there would be a flapper on the bottom of the engine that would move up and down, and that would puff the smoke out of the smokestack. Now, in order to get the light bulb out of the chamber here, all you had to do was to remove the front of the locomotive here. And as we look inside, we can see the little mechanism which holds the smoke unit. Now, in order to replace the light bulb, all you just have to do is turn this little knob here to the left. Now, sometimes this chamber could get stuck, so what I like to do is to take a pair of needle nose pliers and gently twist the knob to the left side to open up the chamber and replacing the light bulb. And once the light bulb is replaced, just put the mechanism back into the chamber and put the front cover back on, just like that. Moving along to the side of the engine here, we have the prototypical wheel arrangement of 6 trucks in the front, 8 drive wheels in the middle, and 6 trailing trucks in the back. And on the cab here, we have the 671 catalog number, and unlike the cab here, the keystone on the front of the engine, if you took notice, was actually 6200, which was actually the real number on the real Pennsylvania turbine. Turning the engine to the cab here, unlike some of the other Lionel engines which have a switch on top, the E-unit would be controlled by this little plug in the back of the motor here. So once you take the plug out, you can actually lock the E-unit into the forward position. Let's say if the train is going forward, you would take this plug out and plug it into this little socket here, and that would keep the locomotive in the forward direction only. Now, if you want to go back into the regular positions, such as neutral, reverse, neutral, and forward again, you would take the plug out and plug it back into the right socket here on the locomotive. So not only this engine, but of course the legendary 700E 5344 Hudson also used this type of mechanism for its E-unit as well, and both engines have become a cult classic up to this very day. Our next engine here is this beautiful model of the Pennsylvania K4 Pacific, which was of course made by Lionel in 1947. Now, without going into full history on the real K4 Pacific, the real locomotive was made by the Baldwin Locomotive Works back in the day, and this Lionel model is a beautiful representation of that engine. First made in 1947 by Lionel, this locomotive actually had a modified smoke unit inside the smokestack. Instead of having the giant light bulb inside of the boiler, this locomotive featured a heating mechanism inside the smoke chamber. Interestingly enough, this locomotive has the prototypical 5690 on the keystone in front, but if we turn the locomotive over to the other side here, we can see that the cab number is actually the catalog number, which is of course 2035. Now, just by looking at this engine, you can tell that Lionel has got the wheel arrangement somewhat close. This is actually a 264 type locomotive, and if we tilt this to the top here, we can see it's got some nice detail. It's got the sand domes on the top. It's also got a very nice looking bell. It also has the E-unit switch on top, which allows us to control the direction of the locomotive. And of course, like I mentioned before, this is where you actually drop the smoke pellet down the smokestack. Now, like I said before, this is a 264 type locomotive. The difference between this model here is that the real locomotive actually had 2 wheels in the front, 6 wheels in the middle, and a 2 trailing truck wheel in the back. Lionel also made another version in 1952. Now, no matter which one you choose from, both of these engines are really nice to have in your collection. Next up, we have one of the most famous locomotives, not only to be made by Lionel, but also made in real life by the Pennsylvania railway designer Raymond Loewy, and that, of course, is the Pennsylvania 2332 GG1. Just like with the K4, this locomotive was also featured in 1947. In the catalog, you can either buy it as a freight train or as a passenger set, headed by a very nice collection of Irvington cars. Now, the GG1 also has a very interesting history in real life because it was also known as the funeral train for FDR in 1945, and it also had the funeral train for Robert Kennedy in 1968. This locomotive, just like its counterpart, was a 4-6-6-4 wheeled arrangement. Now, the GG1 back in the day, even though it was a collectible locomotive, a lot of people didn't know that this locomotive wasn't actually scale, but that's pretty much a story for another day. Now, this locomotive you see here is actually the 1998 reissue made for the Century Club, but as you can see, it's built just as beautiful, and it's a very nice reproduction of the original 1947 Lionel GG1. Now, turning it to the side here, we can see it's very beautifully detailed. We have these very nice looking ladders which are stamped to the side of the engine. We also have the Pennsylvania Keystone in the center here, which is really nice. We also have a very nice looking crisp Pennsylvania road name here, as well as the engine number of 2332. And just like with the original, we also have the 5 stripes in the center of the locomotive. Another nice feature that Lionel had on this locomotive back in the day, as well as this model, is of course the operating pantographs, which you can actually rewire to the motor if you wanted to. Overall, just a very gorgeous engine, and it's also an engine that I'm really happy to have in my possession. One more thing to mention is that Lionel also made a Tuscan Red version, and that locomotive is also known as the Congressional set. Next up, we have this beautiful reissue of the iconic Lionel F3. Only difference is, you guessed it, it's painted for the Pennsylvania. Now, when Lionel reissued the F3 in 1973, it had a little bit of a mixed reception, mainly because that collectors thought that these locomotives lacked something that the original F3 had. And without going into specifics, I gotta say, this is actually a very nice looking reissue of that particular locomotive. Not only is it repainted for Pennsylvania, we also have these very nice looking ladders, which they reissued on the F3 here. We also have the 5 stripes on the locomotive in the front here. And we have the engine number of 8952. And as we turn the locomotive over, just like with the GG1, we have the very nice looking Pennsylvania road name. We also have the 5 stripes, like I mentioned. And another thing that they actually reissued on this engine was the porthole plugs, which were actually seen on the original 1948 Santa Fe and New York Central engines. And going to the top here, we have some very nice looking detail. We also have the 2 horns up top. And if we turn the engine over, we can see the switch to control the direction of the train. We also have the 2 rollers at the bottom here. We have one on the back here, as well as one in the front. Now, this is a double motored engine, And another thing that a lot of people had mixed feelings about was the nylon gears. Now, even though the nylon gears helped make the locomotive run very quiet, it also had a very bad reputation of wearing out after a while. But as long as you lubricate the engine properly, I think it should run just fine. Now, Lionel also made two versions of this Pennsylvania F3. They made the Brunswick green version, as you see here, and they also made a beautiful Tuscan red version. Last but not least, we have this very nice looking model of a Pennsylvania GP7, also made around 1973. And this is also a replica of the GP7, which is currently on display at the Horseshoe Curve in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Interesting thing about this engine in particular is that Lionel actually referred to this as a GP9, which is pretty much inaccurate because it's basically a GP7, only with a modified feature at the top here, which I'll get to in just a second. But let me just turn this engine around so that way you guys get a better view of this locomotive. So the first thing you might notice, it's basically a reissue of the original GP7s, which were made by Lionel back in the day. The only difference is this little handrail here, which is die-cast. Now, most of the Lionel GP7s that were made during the post-war era had stamped metal frames, but this one was actually the first GP7 to feature a die-cast handrail. It also features this little cooling fan mechanism at the top here. I'm not really sure what you would technically call this, but if we zoom in on the bottom piece here, we can see the part number, and this was actually the same part number that was used for the Northern Pacific GP7, which was made around 1959 through 1960. The Minneapolis and St. Louis GP7 also had this little feature at the top of the engine. So overall, just like the other engines which I mentioned before, this is also a very beautiful looking model, and it's also one of my personal favorites just because I just love how the motor inside the engine just runs so smoothly and quietly. Also, a little side note, there's also a dummy unit that is extremely rare to find, which also goes with this engine. So if anybody knows where I can actually find the dummy unit, please let me know in the comments below. I would really like to know. And it's something I would really like to have in my possession. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed this little video that I put together. This is a very fantastic collection, and it would definitely please anybody who is a fan of not only just railroading, but the Pennsylvania Railroad in particular. So thank you guys again for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell down below. And make sure you guys stay tuned tomorrow for episode 6. But anyway, that's it for now. Thank you so much again, and I'll hope to see you all in my next episode. Thanks again, and take care.